Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Welcome back to
Welcome back to the
Advancement Podcast.
That's two.
Oh man, tough day.
Tough crowd.
Super glad you're here with us. If you enjoy what you're listening to, obviously you don't because I'm tearing up this.
They
intro.
enjoy this. We enjoy listening to you stumble through.
Yeah,
stuff.
it's great. Click subscribe on whatever podcasting platform you're looking for. If you could rate us, give us 5 stars and say the host can never get the intro right, but it's a great podcast. You can just give us a rating. It'll help us spread the word about Advancement, and you can click subscribe or like on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching, helps the content come to you every Tuesday and Thursday because we two episodes a week because we're overachievers and one is not enough. My name is Todd Barham. I'm the host of the Advancement Podcast. Here, as always, my friend Timothy Dominic Ware. You doing okay today, Tim?
Timothy Dominic Ware.
I keep waiting for you to call me Ronnie Todd Barham, but you never do.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, I'm all right with it. I'm
Yeah.
secure in my name. It doesn't bother me like you being called Ronnie. Don't call me Ronnie Todd.
Well, that's because it's my dad's name. It's just weird. It's confusing in our household. When Mom started yelling Ronnie, it was like, huh? What? Yeah. Yeah.
Are you a junior?
No. We have different middle names, which really jacks up everything when we travel together because my dad and I look very similar. And so we had a lady one time we were traveling to the Dominican Republic and we were changing our tickets and we both gave her our Ronnie Barham IDs. We looked the same. She just could not handle it. It was just a tough day for her. So I hate traveling with my dad for that reason because it's
okay,
it's
Ronnie.
just tough. It's tough.
Well, Ronnie, all right.
You go. It's just tough for the
family
hired hands
dynamics
at the airport. And I've gotten my dad's mortgage payments before. It got switched to my it's yeah.
Oh, I'm sure he didn't have a problem in the world with that.
Yeah, he's like, just pay it and send me the receipt. I'm like, oh yeah, Dad, sure. I'll get right on that. Although they don't have a mortgage anymore, they paid off their house. So woohoo. I don't get those anymore.
He doesn't get your mortgage now, does he?
No, he doesn't. But one day I'll get to sell the house. It'll be good.
and
I'm the executor of the will.
And there he goes talking about people dying and getting old and dying.
I'm not talking about.
Was that not what he kind of sounded like, Suzie?
Kind of sounded like that to me.
I'm just talking about the burden of the eldest child. I am the eldest child, so I have to take care of my younger siblings. One day.
I'm sorry, I missed the interpretation on that
Yeah.
one. It's so good.
I was trying to get you to feel sorry for me, but it's fine.
That didn't work. No, it's not going to happen. So it's good to have Dr. Suzie Macaluso with us back again for another episode. How are you, Dr. Suzie?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I always love it when you're on because Todd, he doesn't think he's making these ageist comments, but they just roll out. But having Dr. Suzie, who leads the gerontology department at
I know I'm making them. It doesn't bother me at all.
Now the truth comes out.
I'm going to send you a link to a little course you can take called
Yeah, I bet I know who this professor is.
Yeah. Age. I have to have age sensitivity training to come on the podcast. Our listeners tell me all the time they love that I give Tim such a hard time. So
yes, that's true.
That's why they listen.
I hope it's not just because you get. I hope the content's actually worth something.
It's one of many reasons they listen, Tim. They enjoy listening to you. That's why they listen.
Oh, Dr. Suzie, it's so good to have you back with us. Dr. Suzie Macaluso is the head of the gerontology department at Abilene Christian University, And what's I always forget the name of the institute.
It's the Pruitt Gerontology Center.
The Pruitt Gerontology Center. And I just always find it humorous in a unique way that it's a millennial that's in charge of the gerontology center with preschool children.
Somebody's got to take care of you old people.
We're talking about retirement today, and I think my being in this role is a great example of a leader being willing to step aside kind of at the peak of his powers, if you will, and kind of pass on the torch after mentoring me for a few years.
Did someone do that for you?
How old was the your predecessor who groomed you and handed it off to you?
Yeah, so he was in his mid-60s. He was in his early 60s when I came to ACU 10 years ago. And he was over 65, so he was of retirement age officially to get all of the things you need. And so he wasn't entirely ready. He loved teaching, but he saw an opportunity for me to take over. He trusted that I would be able to do the job and take care of the center. And that way he could enjoy his retirement a little bit more. And he started fishing, and he spends a lot of time with his grandchildren and his wife, and very good example of that kind of successful aging and kind of successful transition.
All right. She just said he was over 65, so he get all the benefits and had all the things that go with retiring.
Yeah.
And back before you were born, Todd.
Okay. Pre-1985.
Probably before I was born, there was an organization that was formed that's called AARP, the Association of...
You get mail from them now?
Right? It's true. But they start back when they opened up, the life expectancy was quite a bit younger. Yeah. So they do start sending it to you. They're ready for you on your 50th birthday. You'll start getting it about 48. They're priming the pump. And I get it in the mail and I go, I don't, no.
Hey, they started so early. I've already gotten AARP stuff. I'm not sure if it was intended to come to me.
They're wanting you to give money.
Yeah. Or I was thinking.
They want me to sign up.
Maybe they mixed up mine and my dad's name. I don't know. Maybe. They had the wrong Ronnie, but.
Oh, I look at that and I think they missed the boat somewhere, because I don't feel like I'm quite ready for a AARP membership.
So that spurs me into my question, because we wanted to talk about leading from the second chair. Now knowing that you,
that's actually what you had to kind of walk through some of that.
Hang on, okay, I'm getting there. Stop stepping over me here. All right. How was it like? Because most people have trouble, especially us millennials. There's the reason that churches are being planted now more than they ever have is because millennials such as myself, and I'm taking shots at myself right now, okay, don't want to wait for people to get out of the way so that they can take over. They're not willing to learn. They want to lead now. So what would be some suggestions that you would have, because you've done it successfully, for people that are in the second chair to lead well and to be patient and to allow the Lord to work and to work out his plan?
Yeah, I think step one is to honor the work of the person in the first chair. And so while I was excited to take over the center and I had plans and dreams, but I also didn't want to rush that process, because I wanted my predecessor to feel that he had lived out his calling, that he was doing things on his terms. I never wanted him to ever feel pushed out. And to my knowledge, he doesn't. We still have lunch every now and then, although not really since COVID, but he'll probably listen to this. As he follows a lot of the work that I do with the center. But it's very much an honoring of the work that they are doing, while also taking that time to really prepare yourself. So we always think that we're ready for things. Like I'm a type that likes to jump in full throttle into everything that I do. But it gave me a time to kind of prepare and to be groomed and to learn more as I was waiting. And I think that's really important, is to always be taking the opportunity to learn more, learn from the wisdom of those who've gone before you. You don't have to blaze a new trail. You can learn what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past, and build off of that. It doesn't mean keeping things always the same, but to build off of the traditions of the past is important. And that also helps then with the transition for members, right? When they see this kind of continuity, it's very reassuring to them.
I think it's important that we talk a little bit. You talked about we don't always need to blaze a new trail. If every new leader always blazed a new trail, then the trail would never become a cart path that became a paved road that became a freeway.
Mm-hmm.
There's an some ministries are about expanding the existing, not always about taking new ground.
Yes.
And so how long did you know that this transition was the plan before it happened? Because you said he brought you in 3 years before. Would he bring you in and say, hey, this is what I want to do?
So
from day one?
I don't know where his mind was at, but I think when I very first interviewed for my job, he was thinking about this. But I'm not sure. I've never actually asked him that. But I think when he started talking about retirement was probably about 3 or 4 years before he actually retired. And there was a plan. Part of it came because there was a plan from the university to encourage retirement through some additional benefits. And so
it wasn't just getting AARP and Social Security then.
Yeah.
No. And so he and I talked about it, and he took me to a conference to kind of learn more about gerontology, because that wasn't my primary field before. And we just kind of laid out, here are some plans for the future that we could kind of brainstorm together. This is what this might look like. And we had originally planned for him to step away from the administrative role of the center, but to continue teaching. And the university changed their kind of retirement options to where he kind of had to fully retire. So he ended up delaying it a year. So I thought I'd be stepping into the role, and then I was told I had to wait a year. And that was a challenge for me, because I felt ready to step into this role and ready to kind of move up in the university into a somewhat administrative position, where I can have more time to devote to research and things. And that was really hard for me, but at the same time, it was what was best for the center and best for him. And so that year became a year of doing other things and planning some other things. And then I actually took over while I was on maternity leave. So I had my baby and then took over about a month after I had my son. So the transition was kind of twofold. But it ended up being a good transition, where he and I was able to go to him and ask for guidance. But he also knew that he needed to step back and not make me feel like he was watching my every move. So he did the work on himself so that he could be an encourager to me without ever making me feel like I had to live up to certain expectations.
But the interesting thing, part of the motivation there was that the university was putting some retirement things in place, and most of our churches don't have that type of structural thing, because as you're telling the story, I'm thinking about a pastor that I know who they made a successful transition, but he'd had a guy on staff with him. I think he'd been there 11 years at that point, and for maybe as long as 5. When I retire, I want you to be pastor. And it just, you're ready. You could pastor, but senior pastor wasn't letting go.
Mm.
And I was working with a church in an interim process, and I knew this guy was ready. So I reached out, and he went through the process and was one of the 2 finalists. And when he told his pastor, "Hey, I'm going up for a face-to-face interview," the pastor says, "But I thought you were going to take this over." He said, "You've been saying that for 5 years."
Yeah.
And I don't, when is, what you had for a 1-year delay, and you could at least see the end of the tunnel. This guy couldn't see the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And now within 18 months of that incident, the pastor had stepped aside. It was like all of a sudden there was a fire under him that if I don't do this now, this guy is going to leave, and the church that I've been at for 20 plus years is going to have to go find somebody, or I'm going to have to stay longer to groom somebody. So I think that's the tension that probably exists more, because I can count on, I can probably give you double-digit number of churches where some of those types of conversations have gone on, that I think I want you, and then when it gets close, the pastor ends up going, "Well, I don't want you. I realize that you're not the guy." Or it's just delaying and delaying and delaying, and this person on the bottom end is getting frustrated because they feel like that there's been a promise made that's not being delivered on.
Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement.
Timware has been a huge benefit and blessing to me personally, as well as to my church. When Tim and I first connected in a coaching setting, my church was running in the 130 range. We now run 260, plus we have a really strong online audience. We went through a process of rebranding and changing our name, focusing on our vision, and shifting our culture in a lot of arenas. Tim was invaluable to talk us through that. He came out and met with our team. He was a huge, huge blessing. I highly, highly recommend Advancement.
Now let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about churches is they're different than other workplaces that have like more of a contract base. And so a lot of times in churches, it's about kind of this just handshake or wink, nod. Yes, of course, this is what we're going to do, kind of understanding, as opposed to a formal plan. Whereas with my predecessor, we put a plan together that we took to the dean of our college and said, "Here's how we want to transition this. Here's our plan of succession. Here are some firm dates that we would like to go off of." And so while there was this delay, I understood, and there was another opportunity that existed for me to do something for a year that was different. And I was able to kind of understand that, but the firmness of the plans is important. I think that the responsibilities are on all parties involved, not just the young pastor to wait, and not just on the older pastor to step aside, but everyone has responsibility here. And so for the young pastor who's been waiting for 5 years, it is kind of ridiculous, or not ridiculous, but I think it's asking a little much to say, just keep waiting, and eventually, without a date in sight. And so I think that that's a reasonable time then for them to say, okay, I'm gonna find a church that needs someone where I can fulfill my full calling.
Yeah.
So I think you got to go both ways.
Well, I can tell you, I've got so many of these stories where I saw a pastor bring a young minister in and tell him, "I'm bringing you here so that in 2 years, he says, we're going to do a 2-year plan. He said that in the interview, and then he kind of forgot that he said that. And about 6 months in, the staff guy says, okay, so if this was a 2-year plan and we're 6 months in, when are people going to be, when is it going to be announced? What's the process going to look like? And when the young leader started asking for firmness, for a plan for some of those things, well, he ended up getting fired.
Ooh.
Pastor decided, well, I don't want this. Don't hold me to what I said. But what I also heard you say is that you guys in y'all's transition, you had outside accountability to the process.
Yeah.
So if I'm in a church context, if you're a senior pastor and this is a strategy you're wanting to have, and you're talking to a staff guy, or you're a staff person that a senior pastor has talked to, you need to create some outside accountability, whether it be in the denominational, or you could potentially it's a church board. But there needs to be somebody that has agreed to, this is the strategy that will hold you accountable, and understand that there's flexibility. I mean, things like COVID could have changed everything, because some guys retired faster. Some guys are saying, I've got to get the ship right before we do this. And I understand both sides of that, but there's a place for accountability to the plan for a success. Is that a fair way to summarize what we've heard?
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense, that accountability.
Yeah. We talk about that all the time on the podcast, that accountability is such a big thing, and we don't do it well in the church. And sometimes as leaders, we don't like to hold people accountable because it feels, it doesn't feel loving. It doesn't feel like pastoring to say, no, you said this, now do it.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, we don't like to be held accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you see a lot of people fight back against accountability, and you, like your story, somebody got fired because they were trying to hold people accountable. So my question for you, Suzie, I mean, you kind of alluded to it. I don't know if you were frustrated, but what would you suggest to someone maybe that's sitting there waiting for someone to move out of the way, that might be a little frustrated, that might be a little, I don't know, disenfranchised is probably a harsh word, but tired of waiting?
That's probably not a bad word, though. I think sometimes disenfranchised is exactly how they feel.
Okay. What would you suggest to them, and what are some things they can do to help the process?
Yeah, so I think that this goes back to something that's kind of been a through line through all of this, which is humility, right? And it's understanding that you can fulfill your calling outside of the pulpit. So if someone is feeling frustrated, they need to ask themselves, what is it that is frustrating me? Is it because I'm not getting the recognition? Is it because I'm not getting the promotion or what I view as a promotion? Is it that I'm not feeling valued? And for all of those, we can kind of fix that, right? So if it's I'm not feeling valued, then maybe it's figuring out where else you can plug in that congregation. If you're committed to staying in that congregation and committed to kind of following this plan, then it's finding ways to be satisfied where you are. Through the ministries that you are a part of, the staff, whatever you're doing as a staff member there, how can you be fulfilled in that and be satisfied with that? It's about really questioning, why do you want to be the pulpit minister or the preacher or the head pastor? What is behind that? And then making sure that your motives there are pure, that it is about spreading the gospel and this calling. Because if that's what it's about, there are other ways to do that than being in the pulpit. And I think exploring some of that is helpful. Now, if it's a situation that's unhealthy, where the congregation is unhealthy, and you've got an issue with power and control, then maybe it's exploring whether that congregation is the best fit for you. Are you trying to force yourself to fit into a place where you don't really fit? Does that make sense? So you kind of have two sides. Are you committed to this congregation? You feel that this is the place? Or do you think that maybe God is pulling you to use your gifts elsewhere?
That's a tremendous observation. You know, discerning the will of the Lord is not a exact science.
Sure.
And sometimes it's very easy for us to jump towards an opportunity that's not always the right opportunity. So I think I heard you not just say talk about humility, but I also think there was this place of dependence on the Father.
Yes.
Because if there is a delay, do I really believe what Romans 13 says, that the Lord is in this authority chain piece, that he's setting up authorities? Do I really believe that? I also have to think of, this timing of God. He's in control of the time, in control of the timeline. I'm not. And at the same time, the third piece you added is really incredible, because just because somebody asks me to do it and has cast this vision over my life, and sometimes when we're a young minister, we've been in a church, this may be we respect this leader, and they cast vision over our life, and we get excited about it, but it's not what God's vision over our life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can say that I've been on that side, and it's not a good place to have to find your place, find yourself where the Lord is correcting you and say, well, I didn't say that. Somebody else said that about you in my name, quote unquote, and you went with it. And I can also say that on this side, it's very easy to say things about leaders and people who are following you. And if we're not careful with our language, we can imply things that can be strewed in an unhealthy way. We talked a few episodes back about, before our 100 episode, we talked about how we communicate matters. And sometimes we have to recognize that piece as the leader. We have to make sure we're not making promises we can't keep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem, that a lot of ministers are making these promises. They know they need to do it, but when the time comes to pull the trigger, so to speak, that's when they come to the realization that they're not sure what they're going to do next.
I know a denominational leader who is late 60s.
Okay.
And he was speaking to, he had someone who's nearing 80 who was trying to step out of ministry, saying, it's time for me to retire, my wife's health. And there was a room of people in that age bracket, and he spoke to them, and he quoted from Joshua, the story of Caleb. And he says, Caleb was in his 80s still taking mountains. You aren't done. And he talked these guys who were trying to retire into staying longer. And I actually sent a note to him on the side and said, I know that I don't have a voice, but let me just say to you that you violated what they said they felt like God was saying to them, because of your selfishness for their relationship and the fact that you didn't want the guys who were in the wings who you weren't comfortable with. Yeah. You didn't make space for another generation. And that was not, it wasn't received very well.
That went well, too.
It wasn't received very well. No, it didn't. But, sometimes you still say things, whether it's right or wrong.
And you didn't get fired from the AG?
Who said it? I said a denominational leader. I know more than just Assembly of God people, Todd.
Oh, okay.
You may not, but I do. Father, help me.
I grew up Baptist, so I know a lot of Baptists.
Anyway, so Suzie, as we're coming to the end of this series, we've talked about a lot of things. What is something that you think we haven't said that, from your perspective, it would be critically important for our listeners to hear?
I think that when it comes to successful aging, retirement, living a good life, a lot of it is down to expectations, right? So we get frustrated when our reality does not meet our expectations. And so we need to be realistic in our expectations. We've already talked about making plans, but I think for young pastors coming in, being realistic about a timeline, being realistic about what it is that you want and what it is you feel called to do, and really working to separate that calling from what society tells us we should want, right? We've talked about that quite a bit. But making sure that we're not setting up unrealistic expectations, or that we are not seeking something outside of God saying you've done well, that we're not looking for validation in this world, right?
Yes.
And if we have that attitude, it makes the waiting easier, and it makes stepping away when the time is right easier.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's excellent. Dr. Suzie, I just love hanging out with you. I just enjoy our conversation so much. And thank you so much for coming on and being a part of this. If you're a listener and you're whether you're a senior pastor who is nearing retirement and you're trying to figure out what these next steps should be, if you're a young leader and you're in that place of trying to figure out, should I stay? We've got our team here at Advancement. We'd love to chat with you and coach you through these moments, because these are things that we're involved in quite a bit. But we have to be careful. It's better to have an outside source coming in to help us walk through this, not just because she's an expert, but because
she is an expert.
She is an expert. But the stories I have to tell, I have to be so careful, because some of these people are listeners, and this is a subject that is emotionally charged.
Yes.
And I would say to you, if you're on either end of this, whether it's Advancement or someone else, don't just go the journey alone and make assumptions that you can figure it out and walk it out. There is something about that accountability piece in the journey.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Suzie. It's
Yes,
always a pleasure.
Always good.
Did I ask you what your takeaway was?
You didn't.
Well, Todd, what's your takeaway? Besides that she's a genius.
Yeah, well, that's always the takeaway. But I like how she went back to humility. It takes humility, especially in these transitions. It takes humility on all sides. Humility to wait, and humility to know when we need to step down, when it's time to step down. So this is so tough. That's one of my biggest takeaways. That we need to have patience with people. Because it's very easy for us to say, as young folks, and I'm putting you in the young folk
he called me young. He called me young.
To say, yes, you need to step down, but one day we're going to be there, and we hope that young folks like us will be just as kind to us as hopefully we are to others.
I have a little question for Suzie. If I was sitting in her seat right now, with the fact that all of this conversation turned back to humility, how do you identify that in research?
I don't know. I've never had to measure humility. It's not been a topic of exploration. Maybe I should do that.
It might be an interesting twist on some of these things as you study the church in this aging component.
Mm-hmm.
How would you measure that? So the science piece is got me intrigued right now. Dr. Suzie, thank you so much. Todd, thank you again. We always love it on the Advancement Podcast.
See you next time.
See you next time.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.